It's a great pleasure and honor for me to introduce my colleague and friend, S. Brent Rodriguez-Plate, usually known as Brent Plate. He is Assistant Professor of Religion and Visual Arts at Texas Christian University in Fort Worth. He is the author of numerous academic articles and also many essays for more general media, newspapers, magazines, that sort of thing. He is author or editor of 8 books, the most recent being this one, Blasphemy, Art That Offends, which is it's not even available in the States yet. It's available in the UK, and so we got a couple pre-publication copies. Brent got them, and he's loaned them out for our display here. But it'll be out in a couple weeks in the States, right? Hot off the press. And then this one, Walter Benjamin, Religion and Aesthetics, Rethinking Religion Through the Arts, which came out with Routledge in 2004. He is the senior editor of the journal Material Religion, a new journal, very exciting new project that's getting a lot of attention. And he has too many books in progress for me to name. I can't really keep up. I mentioned already that the theme for this series and the theme for the year is information. And some were here last time when I introduced Avital Ronell and went and checked out some, real information, like some real numbers, while preparing my introduction to her. I went to that ultimate source, that mighty river of bookish information, Amazon.com, to see, what kind of real numbers they might yield. And it worked so well with her book that I thought I would go ahead and do it with Brent's too. The problem is that Brent's Blasphemy book has not yet been digitized, and so not yet run through the various stats machines that Amazon has to see what information it might give up. Thankfully, though, the Benjamin book, Walter Benjamin, Religion and Aesthetics, has been. And so here are some things I learned about that book, just to give you some, real information. The word Benjamin occurs 536 times in the book. The word art, 344 times. The word God, only 66 times, which is just a little bit more than Trauerspiel. They're around the same number. It's 5,290 words per ounce, that book, and 2,692 words per dollar, which I figured out is about 26 words per cent, a little more than that. And that's whether you buy Trauerspiel or God or Benjamin. They don't distinguish. It's very high in SIPs. Do you know what SIPs are? Have you looked at these in Amazon.com? Statistically improbable phrases. Very high in statistically improbable phrases. Some of them include human sensorium, allegorical desire, wooded interior. Statistically improbable. And my favorite, which is perhaps blasphemous to at least one art movement and its motto, fart pour fart, which must be a scanning error. I'm sure it was the L apostrophe getting scanned as F instead of, art pour art. So, but anyway, and may suggest something, I don't know, about the relationship between blasphemy and accident as well, which I think is interesting to think about. But throughout Brent's academic career, he's been pushing the disciplinary boundaries, asking new questions, mashing things up in unprecedented ways. And in fact, I have to say I've made it a point of keeping in touch with him and his work because I find that it opens my own thinking to new horizons. And so it's a great pleasure for me to have this opportunity to introduce him and welcome him here today as he speaks on blasphemous images, secular media. Please join me in welcoming Brent Plate.
Thank you. Thanks, Tim. Thanks to the Baker Nord Center for the Humanities for inviting me here for the term. It's been a good time so far. Got to meet a bunch of new people and learn all kinds of new things, and it's been a great time. I have to note a waiver up front. I had to actually sign a waiver because of the videotaping that's going on, and I had to acknowledge that there won't be anything obscene here. Now, of course, I'm doing this talk is on blasphemy and art that offends. So I signed the waiver anyway, but and part of my argument is that it's in the eye of the beholder what obscenity is. But there are some offensive images that I'll be showing. You can turn aside if you don't want to look at them, but there are naked bodies and some more disturbing other parts. But anyway, that just to warn you up front, this is I guess this would get an R rating if it were in the theaters. So as long as you have your mother and father with you, you're okay. Or your teacher. I suppose you had to sign a waiver too, right, to bring everyone. Might be getting some phone calls later today. Sorry about that. I'll go quickly. Once upon a time in Denmark, a children's book author named Kara Blutgen wanted to make a book about the Prophet Muhammad. Blutgen complained he couldn't find anyone to make illustrations for it because artists believed depictions of the Prophet were blasphemous in Islam, and they feared being attacked by religious extremists. Perhaps their apprehension was heightened by the murder of rebel filmmaker Theo van Gogh in the liberal streets of Amsterdam after he made the film Submission in 2004. This is from the film Submission. The 10-minute film criticized the treatment of women in Islamic society, and many Dutch Muslims considered it blasphemous. The Islamist militant Mohammed Bouhari took Sharia law into his own hands as he shot the filmmaker several times, then pinned a radical manifesto to his dead body with a knife that quoted from apocalyptic passages in the Quran. With Van Gogh's murder fresh in the North European consciousness, the politically conservative newspaper in Denmark, Jyllands-Posten, I'm certainly not pronouncing that correctly, but I think you'll understand. They ostensibly wished to show courage in the face of terror and help Blutgen make his book on the Prophet Muhammad. The paper commissioned a number of cartoonists and caricaturists to draw images of Muhammad as they saw him. Now note, these were not illustrators, what Blutgen was looking for. They were cartoonists, and here we can understand the provocation of the newspapers to begin. A dozen of these were posted on 30th of September 2005. Most of these are silly and hardly salient, and some of these are so poor in quality and execution that the paper should have just been downright embarrassed for even printing them in the first place. Several of the other images depicted nasty, aggressive, and violent depictions, such as Muhammad with a bomb for a turban and another of Muhammad clutching a sword and bearing an angry expression. What he was angry about was never really indicated within the cartoon. Regardless, not much happened after the initial printing, save the protest of a few Muslim groups in Denmark. Soon after, on the 17th of October in 2005, the Egyptian independent paper reprinted several of these images in the middle of Ramadan, the holy month of Ramadan, including the sword-wielding Muhammad there, as you see. Again, not much was said, even printed in Egypt, a predominantly Muslim country. However, protests around the world, many becoming violent, began in early February 2006 after several newspapers across Europe, apparently with nothing better to do than recycle 4-month-old stories, reprinted the images. This time, the news made its own news, and people took notice. Pockets of Muslim groups around the world, almost entirely in war-struck, disaster-struck, or poverty-struck areas, reacted against a European media and the West in general that seemed intent on provocation, a provocation buffeted by brisk sales at newsstands. Muslim leaders called for economic embargoes, flags, especially Danish ones, were burned, sticks and stones were thrown, fires started, people killed. If some Muslims were offended by negative portrayals of what they found sacred, namely Muhammad, many Western journalists, bloggers, and barroom pundits responded by showing what the modern West holds sacred, namely free expression. While the issues raised through the so-called Danish cartoon controversy touch on a number of facets of human life, economic, political, social, religious, The Flintstone, the Flintstone that sparked the upheaval were a handful of images. Even if sidestepping the socio-political issues, New York Times art critic Michael Kimmelman pointed out the power of the images in the midst of the riots. He said, quote, "To many people, pictures will always mysteriously embody the things they depict. Among the issues to be hashed out in this affair, there's a lesson to be gleaned about art. Even a dumb cartoon may not be so dumb if it calls out to someone." End of quote. Kimmelman is here drawing on the work of art historian David Friedberg's Power of Images, an excellent, important book. Artists' intentions are one thing, formal evaluation of images another, and the reception of images, in spite of how dumb they are, is still another. And to understand the place and function of blasphemy, it is necessary to take stock of the power of images and the ways they call out to people. This is another way to ask, as Tom Mitchell has recently, what do pictures want? The power of images would seem to emerge through some quasi-alchemical process. Fine ink lines drawn on paper, curves here, straight line there, and bam, there's a depiction that will really piss someone off. Or maybe a little pigment, a little oil, a surface to work on, and there's a representation, slightly skewed from the real world, that induces tears, that rouses people from their dogmatic slumber and makes them journey hundreds of miles to bask in the presence of the image. That the Frank Gehry-designed Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, Spain, has helped revitalize this post-industrial city tells us much about the ways pilgrimage, and the modern form of tourism, continues to rely on the material realities of images and their attractive power. I'm not sure how clear it is whether the Gehry-designed Peter Lewis School of Management across the street has revitalized the program there, but that might be another field of study. Images gain seemingly immaterial energy and aura from raw materials, causing physical responses on the parts of viewers. And if some seemingly simple images themselves harbor such power, then blasphemous images have explosive potential. My working hypothesis here is that a study of these taboo visual arts tells us a great deal about cultures and clashes of cultures. Blasphemy is a contested, fluid, and dynamic category of meaning, and blasphemous images serve as powerful components in the making and shaping of society since they reveal a general public's lusts, longings, fears, and repulsions. Leonard Levy, legal theorist and writer, spilled more scholarly ink than anyone on the subject of blasphemy in recent times. He says, quote, "Blasphemy is a litmus test of the standards a society feels it must enforce to preserve its unity, its morality, and above all, its salvation." So first, a few comments on defining blasphemy. To a concurring opinion statement from a 1952 Supreme Court censorship case, Justice Felix Frankfurter appended a lengthy list of definitions for the terms sacrilegious and blasphemy, culled from dozens of English dictionaries stretching back to the 17th century. His point was to prove that neither term had a consistent objective meaning that would allow legal conclusions to be drawn from them. This is why I went ahead and signed the waiver today about obscene images. I was relying on Justice Frankfurter's 1952 opinion here. Definitions of blasphemy and sacrilege range from stealing from the church to profaning things devoted to God, from language tending to this dishonor of God to, quote, attribute to God that which is contrary to his nature. Frankfurter's reasoned approach to the topic, outlining the utter subjectivity of charges of blasphemy and sacrilege, helped make this one of the final court cases in the U.S. dealing with such issues. Significant to my purposes here, at the heart of the court case was a short film by Italian director Roberto Rossellini called The Miracle, for which another great Italian director, Federico Fellini, wrote the screenplay. In the film, a somewhat confused and inebriated shepherdess woman has sex with a wandering stranger who's played by Fellini himself. She envisions him to be Saint Joseph, and when she becomes pregnant, she imagines the child must be divine as well. For her beliefs, the woman is mocked and scorned by her neighbors, and in the end, she flees town and gives birth on a mountaintop church. The National League of Decency, a private Catholic organization, called the film, quote, a sacrilegious and blasphemous mockery of Christian religious truth. While in New York, Francis Cardinal Spellman led protests against the screening of the film. Once called the American Pope, Cardinal Spellman was stridently anti-communist, pro-McCarthy, and argued early on for U.S. military involvement in Vietnam. There's a caricature in the 60s by Edward Sorel of Spellman. His protests against Rossellini's film were initially successful, causing the New York Film Board to ban screenings of it, relying on a state law in New York that allowed censorship boards to deny licenses to commercially screened films that were deemed, quote, obscene, indecent, immoral, inhuman, sacrilegious, end quote. The Supreme Court ultimately reversed the New York State ruling, asserting the right to free speech set out in the First Amendment, effectively rewriting the laws on censorship in film which had been in place since the dawn of theaters in the US. Literature had been protected up until this point, but not film. As Justice Frankfurter implies, definitions of blasphemy and related terms are slippery, subjective, and susceptible to manipulation by power seekers. The opinion statement by the US Supreme Court over the Miracle case argued that censorship is questionable on grounds of sacrilege or blasphemy since, quote, the censor is set adrift upon a boundless sea amid a myriad of conflicting currents of religious views with no charts but those provided by the most vocal and powerful orthodoxies, end of quote. In other words, blasphemy and sacrilege cannot be pinned down in a universal, timeless manner, but are prone to endless changes in religious meaning and through power mongering. Just a little filler slide here for a little bit. Extrapolating from this, let me suggest that it is in the accusing itself and in the greater environment in which the charges are made that we find the profound power of blasphemy. It is one of those terms that has gained its lasting power not through semantic stability, but through its instability, its endless manipulability. Blasphemy's history is intertwined with other terms such as sacrilege and heresy most directly, but also with the obscene, impious, idolatrous, offensive, subversive, and taboo, as well as its condemnation in the forms of iconoclasm, censorship, and excommunication, not to mention imprisonment, torture, and execution. Like Justice Frankfurter, I find that researching definitions, hoping to find a clear definition of blasphemy, has instead taken me down a great rabbit hole in which concepts condense or expand, turn perceptions upside down, and generally confuse. And I won't go into the details, but I'm interested in the book. I went through a sort of a brief history of blasphemy in Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, and sort of noted some of the ways, just even within those traditions, it's changed and become rhetorically useful from time to time. To understand blasphemy, we have to struggle with translation, with differences in languages, cultures, theological, and political outlooks across thousands of years. And there is no perfect translation. Blasphemy, to adopt an astronomical metaphor from the German cultural critic Walter Benjamin, is a constellation. It is a symbolic reference point made up of multiple interconnecting points, in other words, the stars. It is furthermore a symbol that provides orientation. Just as ancient mariners navigated by the stars, constellations tell us where we are. Astrologically speaking, they also tell us who we are. The various stars that make up the constellation called blasphemy include idolatry, heresy, sacrilege, obscenity, infidelity, and morality, among others. What is vital to realize is that a constellation is a group of stars among many other stars. Constellations are, above all, symbols, which mean they are material objects invested with particular meaning by their observers. The defining and delimiting of some stars from others is dependent on an audience, on communities of people who agree that this star belongs here and that one over there. Some stars just don't belong in some groups. And it is in part the agreement, the social contract, that makes such constellations meaningful. This does not mean that definitions are impossible. Indeed, my interest here is to rethink blasphemy in light of the visual culture of a 21st century. In a 21st century Western society, moreover, that pretends it no longer believes in the hocus pocus of spiritually charged images. Every society has its taboos, and the concept of blasphemy allows us to look to the forbidden symbols and activities of our past in order to inquire about our own present list of taboos. So taking some cues from the legalese of religious traditions, a stab at a loose definition. The The word blasphemy, in its most literal form, taken from the Greek roots, means evil speech. Since that is a bit ambiguous, common definitions such as contemptuous speech about God, defamation of the divine, or treason against God have all been used. The Greek root theme relates it to speech. And since I'm here interested in images, we have to wonder about how the term is related both to the verbal and the visual, the speaking and the showing. Also, the restriction to language about God or even the divine can be a bit strained, since what is known is that books, persons, ideas, ideologies, nations can be blasphemed against. A number of contemporary dictionaries and encyclopedias suggest a more neutral definition relating to profane speech. And this gets a little bit closer to what I'm interested in. In reference to religion, language about the profane can be useful, especially since it is in contrast to the term sacred, or sometimes called the holy. Contrary to popular parlance, the profane is not inherently negative. It's only the everyday, the ordinary. And through these divisions, we realize how the sacred and profane need each other for their very definitions. The sacred provides meaning and orientation for the profane sustains the sacred. In relation to blasphemy, what must be accounted for is the all-important border between these poles. In its most literal definition, the sacred is that which is set apart from the profane. The sacred refers to beings, humans and otherwise, places, objects, and times which are elevated and charged by the divine and/or human forces with power beyond that of the commonplace. The sacred has the power to bless, to cure, to make meaning, and provide orientation in life, just as it has the power to kill, destroy, and generally make life miserable. Consider most encounters with sacred beings found in the Jewish, Christian, and Muslim scriptures. The initial meeting always results in the profane being afraid in the face of the sacred being. For example, Abram's vision of the God who is about to bless him, Mary during the Gabriel's annunciation, or God speaking revelations to Muhammad in the cave on Mount Hira. All of these beings are initially afraid in the face of this overwhelming presence. Within such a sacred history, the smug contemporary bumper sticker on cars claiming God is my co-pilot is as blasphemous as any crucifix submerged in urine because it does not respect the difference between the sacred and the profane. Because of the power of the sacred, there are rules and rituals that must be followed in the correct manner in order for the profane to come into contact with it. There is a dividing line between the two, but there are always ritualistic passages that allow those lines to be crossed, taking off shoes, washing hands, lighting candles, or that transform the one into the other. There are passages between the sacred and profane, such as consecration ceremonies, ordaining priests, blessing new sites, etc., and even deconsecration ceremonies. Old buildings, images, or persons no longer serve their function and are ritualistically brought back into the profane world. Social, political, theological, economic, and historical authorities keep these categories in place, tell when and how they may be crossed, and thus establish and maintain order. So with the sacred-profane partition in place, I suggest that blasphemy is fundamentally about transgression, about crossing the lines between the sacred and profane in seemingly improper ways. Blasphemy does not play by established rules, does not respect the traditions of socially acceptable ways of ritualizing, and may even poke fun at well-respected symbols and myths. Chris O'Feely's Holy Virgin Mary provoked the ire of New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani, particularly because of the elephant dung used in connection with the Virgin's breast. A plastic crucifix is submerged in urine in Andre Serrano's Piss Christ, calling Senator Jesse Helms to call the image, quote, blasphemy and insensitivity toward the religious community. An image of male genitalia displayed on a screen in the shape of a Greek cross garners the Polish artist Dorota Niznalska a criminal charge with a sentence of community service and payback of court costs. Maqbul Fida Hossain, a Muslim artist in India, paints abstract nudes of many of the Hindu deities, subjecting him to right-wing Hindu groups leveling legal charges and death threats against him. He's had to leave the country recently. Dana International, the transsexual singer who won the 1998 Eurovision Song Contest, performed a traditional Sabbath song in Jerusalem's Old City, while her performance was met with complaints by an Orthodox rabbi calling it blasphemy. A naked woman is photographed across sacred symbols of cross and crescents, as in Katerina Kozra's 1999 Blood Ties, causing outrage, censorship, and charges of blasphemy in Poland. A near-naked woman wears tefillin in a dramatic photo by Leonard Nimoy, stirring Orthodox Jews to accuse him of sacrilege. Another naked woman, this time black and accompanied by an all-black cast, save a white Judas, stands in the role of Jesus in a restaging of Leonardo's famous tableau in Rene Cox's Yo Mama's Last Supper, upsetting Catholic leaders and city mayors. And we can't forget the way in which pop queen Madonna faces the Inquisition again. Her 1989 video for Like a Prayer was called Blasphemous, and then their simulated masturbation scene during performances of Like a Virgin resulted in the Pope calling for a boycott of her tour. Now she's performing her 1980s song Live to Tell on her latest tour while mounted on a mirrored disco cross, wearing a crown of thorns along with her headset microphone. A Vatican cardinal, speaking with the approval of the Pope, called the concert, quote, a blasphemous challenge to the faith and a profanation of the cross, end of quote. Madonna's charges are at least ecumenical, having garnered charges by Protestant leaders in Germany, Catholic leaders in Italy, and Orthodox leaders in Russia. And now, if no one has anything better to do on the eve of Thanksgiving, you can check out Madonna's concert coming to the US. NBC got the license to show Madonna's concert on TV, and they've recently decided to edit out any of the scenes with a cross in it. So they're not sure, I'm curious to see how they're going to do this, but they're going to show the whole concert, and when this song comes on, they're going to play the song, but somehow they're going to show her not on the cross at all. This is the US sort of version of censorship. In case anyone thinks such issues are resigned to the modern age, the history of Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel fresco is a prime example that tells how many in the Vatican considered the nude figures there to be problematic, eventually causing many of the private parts to be covered over by Michelangelo's apprentice. Or the hundreds of examples provided by art historian Leo Steinberg in his Sexuality of Christ in Renaissance Art, in which Jesus was often depicted naked through the 15th, 16th century. Here we have Mantegna's Holy Family. This is in the Kimball Museum in Fort Worth. Piero della Francesca. Here's a Bronzino side-by-side image where you see the little cloth on the left image. That's a later addition by somebody decided to cover Jesus up. And they cleaned it. Eventually, they've gone through and done X-ray photography and found that that wasn't in the original, so they've cleaned it. And this has happened to literally hundreds of paintings around the world. We can also see Perugino's original in the National Gallery in DC and the United States Post Office version, nice cropping of that for their Christmas stamp a few years back. Each of these cases points towards the ways in which blasphemous images have to do with an impure mixing. There is nothing in itself immoral or evil about urine, dung, or nudity. They are simply elements of natural, profane life as humans. But when these are mixed with the potency of sacred symbols, then tongues begin wagging. And there are no specific formal qualities that blasphemous images share, though sexuality, nudity, and bodily fluids seem to register in a great many of them. Collectively, they seem to point toward contemporary society's continual dis-ease with the human body itself, that most intimate and yet most foreign of entities. I ultimately suggest that a blasphemous image is not a category of being in itself. No work of art is blasphemous in and of itself. It must be deemed so from within religious and/or political power structures, whether large or small scale. And there are many examples in which an image has appeared without comment in one setting, only to explode with controversy in another. In short, a blasphemous image needs both an artist and an accuser. The context for accusation includes everything from religious dogmatic assertions to media coverage to political posturing made by authorities seeking to appear as defenders of social decorum and morality. And images do not exist in isolation from cultural norms and values. As a way to incorporate several of the ideas and activities that light up the blasphemous constellation, I am suggesting a use of the language of sacred and profane. Blasphemy is about impure crossings from one side of the sacred-profane divide to another, about juxtaposing the sacred and profane in times and places where they are expected to be kept separate, of twisting the profane so that it appears sacred or making the sacred appear profane. Like a constellation, the difference between the sacred and profane is dependent on its viewers. These perceivers live in real space and time, arguing and agreeing, creating laws and rituals which sediment into tradition and authority. Even so, the line between the sacred and profane is drawn in sand, and the proverbial winds of time below, covering the lines only so that they will be redrawn. The lines, even if decided by convention, are perhaps nonetheless more difficult to move than sand by wind. And this, I believe, is where art, another great constellation of a term, helps a society see differently. In this, I follow George Bernard Shaw's dictum when he states, quote, "New opinions often appear first as jokes and fancies, then as blasphemies and treason, then as questions open to discussion, and finally as established truths." It takes some risk to draw, paint, write, sculpt, and speak in ways that breach the sacred-profane divide. The creator faces political and religious authorities, and artists are confronted with persecution, indifference, scorn, praise, sometimes execution, sometimes a slap on the hand. My aim here is to contribute to this ongoing conversation, not so as to eliminate all difference between the sacred and profane, for that can only end in chaos, but to suggest that oppressive lines can be redrawn. This all leads me to the modern age, to a European-inspired Western society that all too often believes itself to be beyond the taboo-making, sacred status-conferring elements of the old days. Indeed, speaking in the 1930s, modernist poet and essayist T.S. Eliot bemoaned a society with nothing left to blaspheme against. He says, quote, "I am reproaching a world in which blasphemy is impossible." Eliot, I dare say, was looking in the wrong direction. We've seen plenty of examples in which blasphemy has continued to be an issue among religious revivalists seeking to purge society from its evil images and return to a purified olden time. Yet there is another way in which Eliot was looking in the wrong direction. Blasphemy has also moved from the realm of traditional religion into modern secular society, and the targets of blasphemy have been redirected. In the early 17th century, Johannes Terentius was tortured, imprisoned, and had his works of art burned in the Netherlands for creating blasphemous images. I don't have any images of that because they were burned. This is one of the funny things of researching blasphemy, is that there's just a lot that's not there because it's been taken away and destroyed. So any history of blasphemy is necessarily quite incomplete. Around the same time as Terentius, the English philosopher Francis Bacon was championing the empirical sciences, placing great value in education, and was instrumental in ushering in a modern scientific worldview, including a mode of existence that became increasingly skeptical towards the older religious outlooks and the power of images, among others. But among these newfound sacred values came a new potential for profanity, and he even went so far as to claim that the Roman statesman Cato was well punished for his blasphemy against learning. And then in the 19th century, the writer Philip Hamerton suggested that there might even be a blasphemy against friendship. In the modern age, newer liberal values begin to complement the older religiously based ones, and along with that go new accounts for what is sacred in a society, and hence we find new charges of blasphemy. Modernity, on the one hand, seems to go beyond the alchemical belief in images, that such drawings and sculptings could actually amount to anything, but there are a few ways in which blasphemy and blasphemous images continue to be a vital warning sign in the contemporary age. While some artists interested in shock value find easy targets among institutional religion, other recent artworks have continued in a transgressive mode while simultaneously taking a more critical stance on the modern traditional divide. Some of these works remain quite serious even when appearing tongue-in-cheek. Most affirm a progressive view of the world in which the past is indeed left behind and we have nowhere to go but the future. Many issues in the debates over modernity have been bolstered by a scientific view of the world. The debate between science and religion, from evolution versus intelligent design to euthanasia and genetic engineering, continues to occupy a good deal of political and religious energy into the 21st century, and we find artists toying with this debate in their work. To take one example, contemporary British artist Damien Hirst would seem to go against the traditional Western religious outlooks in his art and has often been deemed to shock artists. Yet when looking more closely, his curiously repellent installations on the human-animal body in relation to death and genetic engineering, we find a deeper exploration of the convergence of the scientific and the religious. Of note here are Hirst's works, such as this one. The title of this is The Physical Impossibility of Death in the Mind of Someone Living, which I think is a great title, but most people just know it as The Shark in the Tank. This is from 1991. And then around the same time, a couple years later, he did another piece called Away from the Flock. In other words, The Sheep in the Tank. And this piece was actually vandalized. Someone poured black ink into the tank at one point. On one level, they're just dead animals in tanks of formaldehyde. But what vexes viewers is precisely a confrontation with death, something that modernity notoriously keeps out of sight. Hirst ultimately, I believe, offers a meditation on death in the mind of someone living in ways deeply congruent with traditional contemplative Christian imagery of vanitas, still life paintings, passion plays, and crucifixion images. I note Hirst's work here especially because they were created around the same time that Dolly, the Scottish sheep, was cloned in 1996, causing a great uproar. And here I'm foreshadowing what Tom Mitchell might be talking about in a few weeks on cloning, and he talks about Dolly in his book as well. The enterprise of cloning was itself called the ultimate blasphemy by religious, especially conservative Christian, and other groups. And an op-ed piece in Montreal's Gazette borrowed the language as it began by discussing an international treaty that outlawed human cloning, suggesting how, quote, we may desperately want that ban to hold the line against what seems like a blasphemy against the spirit and the flesh, end of quote. Here again, blasphemy is about transgression, about stepping over a line that some believe is the province of God. In the rhetoric of intelligent design, scientific work can transgress the sacred in ways oddly parallel to the Islamic hadith that forbid image making. Islam has very little to say about problems with images themselves, but does have things to say about the image making, because image making then becomes a challenge to God's sole creative processes. Biology, in the looking in this realm of genetics, becomes a kind of graven image that mimics the natural world. While no Christian zealot, Damien Hirst offers a way back into the very design of the animal makeup itself in an almost reverent and scientific way, even when portrayed in apocalyptic fashion. The final twist in this story is that Dolly died prematurely in 2003, and her body was preserved and put on display in the National Museum of Scotland, looking very much like Hirst's sculpture from 10 years earlier. The Dolly display is particularly targeted towards children who can learn about genetic engineering through interactive tools. Meanwhile, one leitmotif, switching gears here a little bit, one leitmotif throughout contemporary contentious imagery deals with the ubiquitous logos of consumer capitalism, one of the most universal and therefore profane dimensions of life in the 21st century is consumerism and the mass marketing that drives it. Artists have responded with critique and satire as they reappropriate the images of mass consumption. The Russian artist Alexander Kosolapov has worked such things into several pieces and been roundly condemned for his improper mixings. In this one here, of course, mixing the Jesus iconicity with the McDonald's piece, while in other pieces, which is interesting side by side with the icon of Lenin, is mixed there with the Coca-Cola imagery. In another vein, somewhat more disturbing perhaps, Alan Skechner has retouched Holocaust images by digitally inserting consumer products into well-known photos from Buchenwald and elsewhere. This is his self-portrait. He inserts himself along with a Diet Coke can in the midst of a famous image in Buchenwald. These were not considered blasphemous. The term used here wasn't blasphemy from a religious perspective, but again, it was sorely critiqued by many people in many places for this. One can see here what's going on, right, I think, is the improper mixing. The improper mixing of the sacred and the profane. Only here it is a consumer product that appears to have the power to desecrate. In the end, we come back to the point from which we began, the Danish cartoon controversy. If the controversy revealed what some Muslims find authoritative and sacred, that is, Muhammad and his representation, it also proved what many moderns hold authoritative and sacred, namely freedom of expression. If Muhammad can be blasphemed against, then it seems so can expressive freedom. modern human rights charters from the U.S. Bill of Rights to the European Commission on Human Rights have authorized individuals to partake in the freedom of expression through speech and religion, to not be coerced or censored by governments, and to not be coerced or censored by other social groups. Paradoxically, the individual human now has authority, and taking away the freedom of the individual's expression is tantamount to blaspheming against the religious and political authorities of olden times, in whose place the individual now stands. 20th century feminist author Dame Rebecca West argues against censorship, which is to say against the freedom of expression. She says, quote, in the 1920s, she says, "There is a point, and it is reached much more easily than it is supposed, where interference with freedom of art and literature becomes an attack on the life of society. This freedom is as necessary to the mental survival of a society as a satisfactory sanitary system is to its physical survival." End of quote. West's comments, however agreeable to the modern mind, must nonetheless be noted for their parallel to the relation between the religious and social dimensions of blasphemy. Consider Chief Justice Hale's comments in the 17th century, British judge. He says, quote, "Christianity is parcel of the laws of England. Therefore, to reproach the Christian religion is to speak in subversion of the law." End of quote. An attack on the freedom of artistic expression, in West's view, is an attack on society itself, just as Justice Hale notes that blasphemy against Christian religion is also bad for society. Before modernity and its accompanying liberal Enlightenment values, blasphemous images were often censored, burned, scratched, painted over, removed from the public eye. In the modern world, it paradoxically becomes blasphemous to censor an image. This does not mean it is used to be one way only and now is completely the opposite. Instead, both, of course, are operating side by side. Criticizing the extremities to which freedom of expression has gone in the postmodern world, legal theorist and commentator and many other things, Stanley Fish, suggests that the journalists and editors of Jylland's Post and newspaper, and most journalists for that matter, see themselves as objective reporters, neutral in regard to religion. And yet, Fish continues, they adhere to the religion we call liberalism. In that religion are basic tenets. The first is that everything is to be permitted, but nothing is to be taken seriously. Respect all manner of belief. Just don't take it seriously enough to be bothered, changed, or moved by it. In other words, everyone should have their own religion as long as it is a matter of the heart, of personal, private, internal beliefs. But when these are manifested in the public realm in ongoing dialogue, then one must tread lightly, not talking too loudly, since others might take offense. To the contrary, Fish concludes, quote, "A firm adherent of a comprehensive religion doesn't want dialogue about his beliefs. He wants those beliefs to prevail. Dialogue is not a tenet in his creed, and invoking it is unlikely to do anything but further persuade him that you have missed the point, as indeed you are pledged to do, so long as liberalism is the name of your faith." End of quote. The historian Arthur Schlesinger conspires, this is some time ago. "The true believer is always an incipient censor," he said. But Schlesinger, a truer liberal than Fish, opines by quickly equating such firm belief with fanaticism, and concludes that, quote, "We fortunate ones on this side of the moon must celebrate those who affirm the rights of expression against the tyranny of authority." End of quote. Implicit on both accounts is the fact that so long as there are true believers and firm adherents, and as long as there are authorities, there will always be charges of blasphemy and activities of iconoclasm and censorship. I'm not suggesting definitive answers here, and in the end, blasphemy will continue, because societies will continue to hold certain values, objects, and ideas sacred, or hold them as self-evident truths. I've attempted to demonstrate some of the myriad ways words, ideas, and especially images have broken a particular society's established boundary between the sacred and profane, and challenged to rethink their supposedly universally held beliefs and practices. If we imagine it as they, whoever they may be, are still hung up on issues of blasphemy, then perhaps we need to rethink what it is we continue to hold dear, sacred beyond reproach, even if we must go beyond the traditional religious authoritative structures. Images, perhaps more than words today, push on the treasonous, the blasphemous, provoking discussions, riots, further images, and ultimately leading to established truths. Every society has its taboos, and blasphemous images allow us to look directly into the forbidden symbols and activities of our past in order to inquire about our present list of taboos. In so doing, we come up against the structures and strictures of our current culture, enabling a certain charting of the permissible and forbidden that defines contemporary life. Thank you.